Some say that moving into a nursing home is the best choice for the elderly. They say it provides comfort, care, and a worry-free life. But let me ask you, is it truly the best choice? Or is it just the easiest choice? I am 85 years old, and I have lived through more than I ever imagined. Some lessons came through wisdom, others through suffering. But there is one decision I deeply regret. A choice I thought would bring security, but instead took away more than I expected. I moved into a nursing home. At the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. My family assured me, "You'll be safe here. You won't have to struggle anymore." I trusted them. I believed that this would be a place of peace, where I could live out my days without worries. But the truth, it wasn't what I imagined. And that's why I need to talk to you today. If you or someone you love is thinking about a nursing home, there are lessons you need to hear, lessons you experience every day but may not even realize. Each part of this video reveals a hard truth that many don't talk about. But if there's one lesson you absolutely must know, it's lesson 6, the comfort trap. Why leaving is harder than you think. Because once you settle in, getting out isn't as easy as you believe. The longer you stay, the harder it is, not just physically, but emotionally and financially too. So stay with me. Some of what I'll share may surprise you, and some of it may even make you rethink what you thought you knew. But I promise you this, by the end, you'll see aging, independence, and the choices ahead in a new light. And before we begin, I ask one thing. If you find this video helpful, please like and subscribe. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers to keep bringing meaningful content to help the elderly and their families. Your support gives us the motivation to continue sharing these important lessons. Now, let's begin. Lesson 1. The silent pain of being forgotten. Aging teaches us many things. But perhaps the hardest lesson is learning how to exist in a world that seems to have moved on without us. When I first arrived at the nursing home, I held on to the comfort of my family's promises. My daughter came every Sunday, her smile brightening my week. My grandchildren would visit, their laughter filling my heart with warmth. At first, I told myself I was still part of their lives, just in a different way. But time has a way of changing things. The visits became less frequent. "Mom, I'll come next week, I promise," my daughter would say. Her voice hurried over the phone. Next week became next month. My grandson, once eager to tell me about his school projects, became busy with work and friends. The holiday gatherings that once brought me joy slowly faded into quiet afternoons spent alone. One Christmas Eve, I sat in the common room, watching the snow fall outside. The staff had decorated the space with twinkling lights and a plastic tree. Residents around me waited anxiously, eyes fixed on the door, hoping today would be the day their families remembered them. The clock ticked past dinner time. One by one, they sighed and returned to their rooms. I stayed a little longer. As I stared at the empty hallway, a painful truth settled in my heart. I was waiting for something that might never come. This is when I turned to the teachings of the Buddha. Attachment, upadana, is the root of suffering. I had attached myself to the idea that my family would always be there, that love meant constant presence. But life is impermanent. Children grow, their own lives become filled with responsibilities, and the world outside does not pause simply because our own world has slowed down. I remembered the story of Kisa Gotami, the grieving mother who begged the Buddha to bring her dead child back to life. The Buddha told her to collect a mustard seed from a household that had never experienced loss. She searched, but found none. Finally, she understood. Suffering is universal, and no one is exempt from change. My suffering, too, came from resisting the truth of life. I was longing for something that was slipping away, instead of finding peace within myself. If you are considering a nursing home, ask yourself, can you find contentment even if the world forgets you? Because the only way to be truly free is to let go of expectations and embrace the present moment for what it is, not what you wish it to be. Lesson 2. When your life is no longer yours. When I first stepped into the nursing home, I told myself it was just another chapter in life. Just another transition, like moving into my first home, like adjusting to retirement. But it wasn't the same. The weight of the air felt different. The walls, though painted in soft colors, felt bare and unfamiliar. The quiet humming of the fluorescent lights overhead only made the silence heavier. On my first morning there, I woke up and instinctively reached for the book I had been reading at home, only to realize it wasn't on my nightstand. The nightstand itself was different, too. Smaller, sterile, without the little scratches and imperfections that told the story of years of use. My room had no traces of me in it. I was a guest in my own life. Breakfast came at precisely 7:30 a.m., placed before me whether I was hungry or not. A walk outside? Not without permission. Want to sleep in? The routine didn't allow it. Even the smallest decisions, the ones I had never thought about before, were no longer mine to make. I think of my old neighbor, Mrs. Lee. She was a proud woman, once the matriarch of a family that looked to her for wisdom, for comfort. In her younger years, she would wake up before sunrise to prepare breakfast for her grandchildren, the smell of jasmine tea and steamed buns filling her home. But when she moved into a nursing home, her world shrank. The first time she was told she couldn't have tea before breakfast because it wasn't on the menu, she laughed, thinking it was a joke. But it wasn't. I used to decide when the sun rose in my home, she told me one evening, her frail hands gripping the arms of her chair. Now, I must wait for someone to open the curtains. Her story reminded me of the Buddha's teachings on anicca, the impermanence of all things. We build our lives thinking we have control, as if our routines will last forever. But life changes, sometimes in an instant. The more we cling to what was, the more we suffer. And yet, there is a lesson in this too. The Buddha taught that freedom is not in circumstances, but in the mind. Independence, in the truest sense, is not about controlling every detail of life, but in learning to let go. But letting go is hard. And if you are considering a nursing home, ask yourself, are you ready to surrender the small freedoms that make life yours? Because once they are gone, you will miss them more than you ever thought possible. Lesson 3. The Comfort Trap. Why leaving is harder than you think. When I first moved into the nursing home, I told myself it was temporary. I stood in the doorway of my new room, suitcase in hand, reassuring myself that this was just a trial. I'll give it a few months, I thought. If I don't like it, I can always leave. It was easy to believe in that moment. My house was still standing. My children still spoke of it as Mom's place. I had left my favorite chair in the living room, my books still neatly stacked on the bedside table. My mind clung to the thought that home was waiting for me, untouched, unchanged. But life does not wait. At first, the nursing home felt like a relief. Meals were prepared for me. I no longer had to scrub floors or lift heavy groceries. The laundry was done without me ever needing to think about it. It was easy, and that's what made it dangerous. Because with every passing week, the idea of going back home felt heavier. One day, I realized I hadn't walked more than a few steps in weeks. I used to walk to the market, to the garden, up the stairs without hesitation. But now, my legs ached just from getting up. My muscles, once strong from years of caring for a household, had weakened from disuse. The things I used to do without thinking, cooking, reaching for a high shelf, bending down to tie my shoes, suddenly felt foreign. And then I started to notice something else. My house, the one I once dreamed of returning to, was no longer mine in the way I had imagined. My children, meaning well, had started making decisions without me. "We sold the old dining table, Mom. You won't need it anymore. We cleaned out your closet. Most of the clothes were too old anyway. We were thinking of renting the house out. It's too much work to keep it empty." And just like that, the home I had been holding onto in my mind was no longer real. I wasn't the only one who faced this realization. There was a man named Edward. When he first moved in, he swore he'd only stay a few months. He kept telling everyone he was just getting his strength back before he returned home. But months passed, then a year. His home was sold, his furniture gone. One evening, he sighed and said, "I thought I was taking a break from my life, but I didn't realize I was leaving it behind." This reminded me of an important Buddhist teaching. The path of least resistance is often the most dangerous. In life, we are given choices, and often we choose what seems easiest because it is comfortable. But comfort is not the same as happiness. Buddhism teaches that attachment keeps us from seeing reality clearly. I had attached myself to the idea that my home would always be waiting, that my independence was something I could reclaim at any time. But the truth was, the longer I stayed, the harder it became to leave. So if you are considering a nursing home, ask yourself, are you prepared for the possibility that leaving might not be an option? Because once you settle in, the barriers to leaving, whether financial, physical, or emotional, can be harder to overcome than you think. And by the time you realize it, the home you once longed for may no longer be yours to return to. Lesson 4. Losing purpose, when every day feels the same. There was a time when my days had rhythm, a quiet structure built from years of small, meaningful tasks. In the mornings, I would wake before the sun, shuffle to the kitchen, and make myself a cup of tea. One hand steadying the kettle, the other reaching for my favorite porcelain cup, a gift from my late husband. As the tea steeped, I would step onto my small balcony, water the plants, and greet the day. These were little things I had done for decades, things I had never thought of as significant. And yet, they were everything. Because when I moved into the nursing home, they were the first things to disappear. No more tea making. My morning drink arrived on a tray, lukewarm and in a plastic cup. No more tending to my plants. There were flowers in the common room, but they weren't mine to care for. No more sweeping, dusting, tidying up. It was all done for me, as if my hands had suddenly become incapable of work. At first I told myself this was a gift, a well-earned rest. But then the days stretched long. There was nothing to wake up for, nothing that needed my care. I saw the same loss in others. There was a man named Harold. Before coming here, he had been a carpenter. He built things with his hands, tables, cabinets, cribs for his grandchildren. His hands had known the grain of wood, the weight of a hammer, the balance of a saw gliding through oak. But here, his hands lay still on his lap. One afternoon, as we sat together watching the rain tap against the window, he sighed. "I feel useless." And I knew exactly what he meant. This is when I remembered the Buddha's teaching on sati, mindfulness. Purpose does not come from grand achievements. It is found in the smallest of acts, if only we bring our full awareness to them. The Zen monks speak of enlightenment in sweeping a floor, in washing a dish, in pouring a cup of tea. So I began to reclaim my purpose, in the only way I could. I folded my blanket each morning with care. I spoke kind words to those around me. I held Harold's hand when he felt lost, and I found that even in the simplest of acts, there was meaning. If you're considering a nursing home, ask yourself, how will you maintain your sense of purpose? Because without purpose, life becomes an endless waiting room. But with mindfulness, even the smallest moments can become sacred. Lesson 5. Stripped of privacy, struggling for dignity. At home, I had my own space. My own chair by the window where I would sit in the afternoon light, sipping tea, watching the world outside move in its familiar rhythm. I had a door I could close when I wanted silence, a bed that felt like a sanctuary, a kitchen where I moved at my own pace. My life was my own. But when I moved into the nursing home, I quickly realized that privacy was no longer something I could expect. It was something I had to accept losing. The first time it happened, I was sitting in my room, trying to read, when the door suddenly opened. A staff member walked in, cheerful but unannounced, checking on me as if I were a box to be ticked on a list. It was a small thing, but it hit me hard. I was no longer just a person. I was now a patient. And then there were the other moments. Needing help to get dressed in the morning, having someone assist me in the bathroom, not being able to decide when to shower, when to eat, when to simply be alone. I met a woman named Helen, a retired school teacher with a sharp mind and a quiet dignity. She had spent her life commanding a classroom, guiding young minds, shaping the world in her own way. But here she found herself sharing a room with a stranger who talked in her sleep, who moved through the space without care for boundaries. One night she whispered to me, "I feel like a guest in my own life." And I knew exactly what she meant. This is where I turned to the Buddha's teaching on anatta, the illusion of self. For most of our lives we build identities. I am a mother. I am a teacher. I am strong. But what happens when those identities are taken from us? What happens when the world no longer sees us as the people we once were, but as patients, residents, someone to be taken care of, rather than someone who once took care of others? The Buddha taught that suffering comes from attachment, to roles, to control, to the idea of who we think we are. And I saw that my pain was not just about the loss of privacy, but about the loss of who I thought I was. I had to learn a new way to see dignity, not in controlling everything around me, but in accepting change without losing myself. If you are considering a nursing home, ask yourself, are you ready to accept a life where privacy is no longer guaranteed? And can you find dignity, not in control, but in acceptance? Because true peace is not in holding on, it is in learning to let go. Lesson 6, the slow fade, how we lose our strength without noticing. Before I moved into the nursing home, I had a rhythm to my days. I wasn't running marathons, but I moved. I would wake up, stretch my arms toward the ceiling, and feel the satisfying pull of my muscles awakening. I cooked my own meals, stirring a pot of soup with steady hands, kneeling down to pull a pan from the cupboard without thinking twice. I took walks every afternoon, slow, steady steps around the garden, feeling the sun on my back, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. But here, things were different. At first, it seemed like a luxury. Meals were brought to me. I no longer had to stand at the stove or bend down to fetch ingredients. Cleaning? No need. If I dropped something, someone would pick it up for me. If I needed anything, I just had to push a button and someone would come. It was easier, and that's what made it so dangerous. Because little by little, I stopped moving. One morning I went to stand up from my chair, and suddenly it felt like a chore. My legs, once strong and reliable, trembled slightly beneath me. I shrugged it off. Just a bad morning, I told myself. But then it happened again. And again. The muscles I had spent a lifetime using had started to fade. The simple act of rising from a chair became something I had to think about. I wasn't alone in this. There was a woman named Margaret. When she first arrived, she was independent, walking the halls with confidence. "I'll never be one of those people stuck in a wheelchair," she used to say with a laugh. But then she started using a walker. Then a few months later, a wheelchair. One day she whispered to me, her voice shaking, "I don't know when it happened, but I feel like I've aged 10 years in just a few months." And I knew exactly what she meant. This is the lesson the Buddha taught about anatta, the impermanence of all things. Aging is natural, the body changes. But what we fail to realize is that the more we surrender movement, the faster we decline. If you are considering a nursing home, ask yourself, will you still have the motivation to keep your body strong when everything is set up to make life effortless? Because once you slow down, getting back up isn't easy. And the greatest loss is not just strength. It's the quiet confidence of knowing you can still move through the world on your own terms. Lesson 7. The heavy weight of regret. What we wish we'd done differently. Many elderly people, myself included, find themselves reflecting on the past more than ever. The quiet moments in the nursing home stretch long, and in that silence, the mind starts to wander. Could I have done things differently? Did I make the right choices? Did I love enough, give enough, live enough? Regret can be a heavy burden, one that weighs down the heart more than aging ever could. I met a woman named Eleanor. She had been a mother, a wife, a business owner, a woman full of fire and determination. But as she sat in her wheelchair staring at the rain outside, she sighed deeply and whispered, "I wish I had spent more time with my children instead of working so much." Another man, Paul, carried a different regret. "I spent my life being stubborn, holding grudges, and now the people I was angry with are gone, and I'm left here, holding on to something that doesn't even matter anymore." The Buddha taught about dukkha, the suffering that comes from attachment. Many of us hold on to the past, replaying it over and over as if we could change it. But suffering only grows when we refuse to accept what has already happened. A river does not stop to collect its water once it has passed. It flows onward. So must we. If you are in your later years, ask yourself, can you forgive yourself? Can you let go of what you cannot change? Because true peace is not found in correcting the past, it is found in accepting it. Lesson 8. Making peace with the inevitable. One of the greatest fears of aging is the knowledge that time is limited. I have met many here in the nursing home who do not speak of it, but I can see it in their eyes. The fear of the unknown. The fear of when the final moment will come. The fear of what comes next. There was a woman named Rose. She was 90 years old, but you wouldn't know it from the way she smiled, always humming an old tune from her younger years. One day, I asked her how she stayed so lighthearted despite knowing she had fewer years ahead than behind. She smiled and said, "Because I made peace with it. Death is just another doorway. I don't cling to it. I don't fear it. I just live while I am here." Buddhism teaches anicca, the impermanence of all things. Life, like the breath, comes and goes. Clinging to life creates fear. Accepting its natural cycle brings peace. The Buddha compared life to a dewdrop on a leaf in the morning sun. It is beautiful, glistening with light, but it is not meant to last forever. If you are in your later years, ask yourself, can you make peace with impermanence? Can you see the beauty in the moment rather than fearing the end? Because true peace is not found in fighting against time, it is found in embracing it. Aging is not the enemy, it is a path we all must walk, some with fear, some with resistance, and some with acceptance. Looking back, I don't regret growing old. Aging is a privilege denied to many. But I do regret believing that moving into a nursing home was my only choice. I stepped through those doors expecting comfort, security, and a simpler life. What I found instead was a slow erosion of the things that made me who I was. My independence, my privacy, my sense of purpose, even my identity. Does this mean nursing homes are bad? No, some people truly need the care they provide. But before making that decision, ask yourself, are you choosing this because it's truly what's best for you? Or are you choosing it because it's the easiest option? Buddhism teaches us that dukkha, suffering, arises when we cling too tightly to things that are changing. Our health, our routines, our roles in life, everything shifts, whether we like it or not. But suffering does not come from change itself. It comes from our resistance to change. Aging is not something to fear, but losing yourself in the process, that is something to be mindful of. So whatever path you choose, choose it consciously. Choose it not out of fear, but with wisdom. Choose it not out of habit, but with awareness. And remember, life is not measured by how long we live, but by how deeply we experience each moment. If this message resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support gives us the motivation to continue creating meaningful content for the elderly and their families. And if you know someone struggling with these choices, share this video with them. Sometimes, The most powerful gift we can give is the right message at the right time. May you find peace in every stage of life.